Hi, and welcome to another edition of Ruins of Empire with your host, Rafael Pinheiro. Tonight's topic is going to be a controversial one. I'm going to be talking about storytelling in video games. I'll start by saying that I find the concept of storytelling when it comes to video games to be irksome. Every time I hear the term, it doesn't feel right to me. And there's a particular reason for that. I'll start with a little bit of a story first, and then I'll get into the nitty gritty of what I mean about not liking the idea of storytelling in video games. Um, about 2 years ago, 2013, I played two games. One of them was Mass Effect 3, and the other one was Far Cry 3. Now, Mass Effect 3 was, I liked the game, but I was one of those people who didn't like the ending. I'm not going to get into the particulars of the ending. I would just say that part of the comments that was made in defense of that particular ending was the idea that this was the story that the developers wanted to tell. Now, the quick answer to that would be, well, they told it wrong, right? They screwed up. And go into a list of reasons why that they did it wrong, what they did wrong, etc., etc. But still, the fact remains. This seems to be the story that they wanted to tell. And that fact bothered me. I couldn't pin down why it bothered me exactly, but it did bother me. So, well, I moved on. Then came Far Cry 3. And at first, I rented the game and basically did a sort of first impressions. I played about 5 to 10 hours of the game, mostly spent on the sandbox part of the game, and then typical Ubisoft sandbox. You have your towers, you have your guns, you have your bases, you have your hidden secrets, and it was a gorgeous environment even on the 360. And it was a very good game, and I liked it so far. And it started touching on the story itself, right? But I didn't really get too deep into the story, not too deep into the rabbit hole that is the story in Far Cry 3, or should I say story missions. And then, I moved on, I played other games, and then I came back to Far Cry 3, and I played it through. And the second time around, I was disappointed. Why was I disappointed? Because Far Cry 3 relied on a very tired trope. A trope that I haven't found a name for it. I'm sure somebody has a better name for it, but I like to call it the prisoner's plot dilemma. And what is it? What is this trope about the prisoner's plot dilemma? Well, in video games, especially the way Far Cry 3 does it, is that it seems that the only way to move the plot forward is to take the main character prisoner. Essentially, disable the character in some way through drugs or taking them prisoner and literally tie them down to a chair or something, or manacles, or throw them into a prison, and then have NPCs come in, tell them what the plot is. The plot moves, and then the plot moves forward, the next point in the plot, and then you're released and you're allowed to go back into the game and do whatever, right? And this is glaring specifically in when it comes to sandbox games. And it also reminded me of one of the reasons why I think that Grand Theft Auto San Andreas back in the Xbox OC days, and OC stands for original console, was not as well received as some other games like Vice City. It was a great game. It was basically the epitome mechanically of that era of the 3D Grand Theft Auto games before they got rebooted in Grand Theft Auto 4. It had the largest sandbox. It had tons of vehicles. You could do a lot of things, swimming, and you could level up your character. It didn't have levels, but it kind of had a soft progression system, and it was a lot of fun, right? Great music, all that. But when it came to the story, again, that game insisted on using the prisoner's plot dilemma, constantly putting a gun to the back of the head of the main character, taking the character prisoner. It seemed that was the only way to move the story forward, And that's when I realized what the problem was. The problem was storytelling. The developers of Grand Theft Auto San Andreas and the developers of Far Cry 3 and many other games have been trying to do storytelling in video games. And when I realized that, all of a sudden it's like, that's the problem. Now, that's the controversial part because you probably have heard of the terms like, there's no problem with storytelling in video games, right? Well, there is. In order to illustrate what the problem is, I'm going to give you a simple exercise. 2 sentences. The first sentence goes something like this. The player plays the game. The sentence, you break it down, is the player, the subject, the actor, does the thing, and the thing that the player does is to play, and he acts upon what? The game. The player acts upon the game, and that act is to play the game. He is the active participant. In the second sentence goes something like this. The storyteller or developer tells a story to the audience. The developer is the actor. And he acts upon the audience by way of telling a story. You say, okay, what's the problem? Well, the problem is that video games are played. Video games are an interactive medium. In a video game, you're not simply asked to play. Your participation is not simply required; it is demanded. It is measured in your success or failure. There's a concept at the heart of video games, which I like to call the illusion of control, which is driven by player agency, which is a totality of all the inputs and decisions a player makes while playing the game. It is measured of skill, of the learning curve and the challenge curve. Success and failure, talk about success and failure states, are based on the ability of the player to overcome the challenges before them. Again, the video game and all of that creates an illusion of being in control, the illusion of control, which is, I think, the central paradigm of games. And that is driven by gameplay, primarily gameplay. It can be backed up by story elements, but it is primarily driven by gameplay. What you can or cannot do, when can you do it, how can you do it, and it's all kinds of gameplay elements: exploration, combat, progression systems, travel, dialogue options. All of these things build up a consisting illusion. It is an illusion because you're still working within the program parameters of the game, of course. If you want to break those parameters, you either have to mod the game or use a loophole or exploit a bug or something. Use a cheat code or something like that. So it is illusion. But the stronger this illusion, usually the better the game. Now, it's not either or. You can graduate the player agency. Some more games are more linear and tend to have more simplified game mechanics, while others have to have a greater amount of mechanics layered upon the control scheme, etc. So you have a greater sense of agency and perhaps, and always, a stronger illusion of control. When you storytell, in order to effectively storytell, like, say, other visual media such as television and movies, there's a certain expectation that you're going to have a passive audience, right? Because if I'm doing the telling and you're doing, I need someone to do the listening, to do the watching, the observing, right? You don't, it's like somebody talking while you're watching a movie in a theater. It bothers you. It interrupts your experience. The best experience when you're sitting there, and you can have a reaction to what's going on. You can gasp and you can laugh and stuff like that. But there's a certain expectation. You're going to sit there, you're going to watch the movie for an hour or two, and then go home, right? Same thing with an hour or so, 2 hours of television. You sit there, you watch on a computer, like this YouTube video or television program, and then it's done. It's done. It's over. So you can see now there's a clash between what the player is supposed to be doing and what the storyteller is supposed to be doing. If you assume that the role of a video game is to tell a story, you're overwriting the core concept of player agency, of player action. Now, a little bit of that is useful, could be useful, but like Far Cry 3 did, and like the ending of Mass Effect 3 did, when you do it in a consistent term, there comes a point where you have to ask yourself, wait a minute, what am I doing this for? Right? Is this my actions, my skill, or is this my story or the player character story, or is this someone else's story, right? Am I an actual participant? Am I actually in control and being the primary, the driving force of the action, or am I simply watching other people do things, right? I think I'm just simply a witness to what's going on, or even a victim. Now, this conflict between narrative elements or storytelling, particularly, and gameplay is what's called ludonarrative dissonance. When there's a clash, when elements from one side and elements on the other simply don't mesh. The story tells you something, as things should be in one area, but then when you go and play the game, you can do things that the story says you shouldn't be able to do, or you're unable to do things that the story hints that you should be able to do, right? And most of the time, almost all those conflicts come from the idea that the game should serve the storytelling, that the active or interactive aspect of the game should serve the non-interactive, the passive aspects of the game. And that's why I reject storytelling in video games. I am not rejecting story. Far from it. Right now, you're probably thinking, oh, this guy wants to go back to days of Pac-Man and Defender and Asteroid, and Missile Command and stuff like that. He's stuck in some of those indie games that are just, shoot 'em ups and stuff like that. No, I want my sophisticated stories. I want, my romances and my epic adventures. This guy's stuck in the 1980s or something, 1970s. Go back, go play Pong or something. Games have evolved. Here's the thing. I'm not against, I'll say it again, I'm not against story in video games. In fact, one of the reasons why I'm making this video is I believe that I want more story in video games, which is not the same thing as storytelling. Storytelling is the act of telling a story. Story itself is something different. And I think it's time that we switch the mindset from thinking that video games are for storytelling, and there are many reasons for that, which I'll discuss in the next video, why people use this term, and focus on what the story can do to make, or a story can do for the game. How do you use story as a game design element to make a better game? Now, I'm going to tell you a little secret. I mentioned all those games before, and there are many other games. I'm actually playing a game called Trousers, which has almost no story whatsoever. There's some hints about you fighting some people, but it's just a shoot 'em up, basically. It's a fun shoot 'em up. It has, for all intents and purposes, it has some characters. I mean, some people show up on the screen once in a while. And it has a bit of a setting, something of a sort of World War II, maybe early 1950, 1960 jet era type situation. Atomic age, maybe, because it has nuclear weapons. And that's about it. And it's a perfectly good game. It's a very recent game, right? And so you can have a lot. I'm sorry about the arming that. I apologize. You can have a game without a story and be a perfectly good game. The same is not true the other way around. You can end up with a situation where you have so much story, right? And you impose the story upon the video game that, again, that's a subject for another day, that you end up with a non-video game, right? So how do you strike a balance between this? Well, like I said before, we have to shift the way we think about these things. We have to shift the paradigm. We have to abandon the idea that video games are for storytelling and instead think about how story can make for a better video game. And then some people are going like, nah, this guy just doesn't know what he's talking about. It sounds like semantics. No, it isn't. Like I said, you don't need a story to have a video game. You can also have a situation where you can decide to have elements of narrative be used in a video game, but not a coherent or consistent narrative. And it still be a good game. In fact, many games, even genres of game, focus on one or more elements of narrative, such as setting or plot or characters, but they don't use all of them. Or they've used very little of the other ones. I say fighting games. Fighting games are very popular, and they almost have a total emphasis on character. They have an excuse plot and why the reason the characters are fighting, and setting just a background, a series of locations for you to fight in, and that's it. And you have your music and the backgrounds and all that, but that's all there's to it. All the emphasis is on characters, interesting characters with interesting moves sets and power ups and all that that you want to play, right? And you want to win these fights. Um, you don't really need to know the whole background of your own character, let alone any other characters. It might be available. Usually, it's available all there in the manual. When I mean all there in the manual, it's in a wiki page or something like that, or in an animated series or tie-in novels, because there's no reason to have it in the game. And again, it's a perfectly good game. Mind you, it might not be your cup of tea, but it's still a game. Because most people say, well, if you don't have a story, you don't have a video game. No, that's not true. Now, in order to understand uh, how to use narrative, we have to understand what each of these elements, these three elements, brings to the table, and why are they something that you want to use. Let's start with setting. Setting, as easily defined by any dictionary, is the time and place of events, where the events take place. And setting can bring you a sense of history, usually through lore. A lot of games, especially modern day role playing games, have a lot of bits of lore. You talk to a character and they tell you about the dragon in the mountain. You read about the religions of the ancient kingdom, or you read a codex entry about faster than light travel and stuff like that. That gives you a sense of history, a sense that the setting in which you're in it existed before you, exists while you're there, and will continue to exist after you leave, right? And also a place where things happen. It's not a static setting. There's a history there, which means that people have done things. People have succeeded. People have failed. People have lived. People have died. It is fictional, but it does give you a sense of permanency, an illusion of permanency. It's also another aspect of setting is what's called in literature world building, and this is very crucial when it comes to marrying elements of a narrative with gameplay and using narrative to support the gameplay. Because world building is all about, how the world, how this universe in this game, the setting came about. And often is rules about magic and technology and politics and economics. Why is it that gold is a preferred currency and prices are high or low? Why is it that magic works the way it does? So you have a series of mechanics around magic or technology. Why do you have fast and light travel? Why can you teleport? Why can you take 100 bullets and not die? Stuff like that. In a carefully crafted setting, which has a profound amount of world building, will in fact support the bulk of the gameplay elements, and will make not only would allow you to suspend your disbelief as a player, but in fact the combination of lore and world building allows you to go further, to do something that other mediums or the media don't have, and that's immersion. To allow the player to suck in the player and really get into the game itself, and sort of inhabit that headspace that it's created, and the connection between the world of the game and the player. Like while they're playing their game, they are running around Skyrim or the DC Wasteland or the jungles and grasslands of Rook Island, or wherever else it might be, or San Andreas, or Liberty City, or the Citadel, or any other place it might be, right? That is very. It can be very important if you want to create that sense of timelessness, of permanence, and if you really want to craft a sense of internal logic and consistency that helps not only the player suspend their disbelief, but also immerse themselves in the game. So that's just setting alone. Plot, and this is where a lot of the storytellers get into problems. It should be used more as a guide, right? as opposed to something that you hammer over the head and something you have to deliver to the player, right? The plot points. Plot points are simply the plot is simply the uh, the string of events, right? This happened and then this happened and this happened. That's what a plot is. And in a video game, a plot can be used to give a reason why the player does the things that they're doing. Um, it creates sort of the outer boundaries of the action and frames the action, um, and also it can give a sense of structure. Now, in a more linear game, it might rely heavily on plot to drive the action. But one has to be very careful versus sort of putting the characters on a lane or multi-lane road where they feel that they have a sense of a maneuver within the confines of the plot versus putting them on rails where they literally have to, unless you're actually developing a rail shooter, they have no place to go, and no matter what happens, they have to follow what the plot delivers. And in these situations, most of the time, the storyteller will have the tendency to use techniques like cutscenes and QTEs to minimize or suspend the player agency, so that it can, in fact, tell you what the plot is all about. And then once they're done with it, it's like, oh yeah, go ahead. You can go back to playing whatever the game you were playing. Well, go ahead. Thank you. Right? And so it can be very tricky balancing the needs when it comes to plot versus from giving a structure and a reason for the actions that the players are engaging in versus making sure that the player follows the pre-established plot. One aspect comes from the game developer says, I'm going to use plot to make a better game. The other one comes from the mindset of the storyteller who wants desperately to turn the game into a vehicle to deliver the plot, deliver the story. Now we have the part about characters. And characters are very interesting because characters are what I call the point of contact between the player and the world. They put a face and a voice, increasingly a face and a voice, to the setting, in the sense that many characters represent different aspects of the setting. The politics, the religion, the beliefs, the economy. They're victims of war and conflict, but they're also emotional anchors, right? It's much easier to care for a person, even if it's a fictional person, than it is to care about a thing, right? In fact, we'll go to great lengths to personalize settings, even in games like in case of Portal, for example, the companion cube became basically a character in itself. And in Portal 2, the turrets became kind of like characters unto themselves, and the robots, and that created a sense of that you were not alone, that there were others in this world, and their actions and reactions shaped your experience, and that is very important to it. Also, characters are the people that are your fellow protagonists, your fellow heroes in your party. If it's an RPG, they are your antagonists. They're the people who inhabit the setting and they make the setting come alive. A relatively empty setting, while might provide for some interesting concepts, you can have a place where it's empty. It's more interesting if, in fact, is inhabited, or at least feels like it had been inhabited at some point, right? That you're not alone. That your actions affect not only yourself but others as well, and that you are affected by their actions. So you have a situation where you have actions and reactions, right? That your decisions matter not only to yourself but to many others as well. So characters, again, are important in the sense of creating a point of contact, as well as giving a face to the setting, to the game, and also as emotional anchors. We care about the characters. We love them, we despise them, we love to hate them, etc., etc. Now, again, if you're designing a game, you can say, well, I'm gonna rely on setting a lot and not characters or plot or setting characters, but I'm gonna use an excuse plot, whatever, right? But you say, no. My game is gonna be, it's going to be a very ambitious game. It's going to have a story, right? It's going to have all the elements of the story. I'm going to have a great setting, a fast-moving, interesting plot, and a host of characters that will that we engage the player, and the character will like to play a character, and the player will like to help and in their goals or defeat or what have you. Okay, you're gonna bring them all together into a coherent and hopefully strong narrative. But what does this strong narrative does for the game, right? If we're not making the game to tell that story, and we're saying that we have to use the story to help the game, then what? Why are we doing this? What is the story bringing to the game? Well, it does two things. First of all, you can use it as a base. Kind of think of it as a base of a pyramid, right? In which the gameplay is built upon, right? And it tends to raise the game. A game with a good story attached to it tends to be more memorable because it has characters you interacted with. It had a plot that you were interested in seeing what happened next. It had a setting that was provocative and you wanted to immerse yourself in. It makes for a better game if it's a good story used in the service of the game, right? To further make a better game. But something else a narrative can do that is absent in gameplay, and that's narrative depth. The sense that there's always more to what's going on, right? And how do you create the narrative depth? Well, you create the narrative depth not by having an extremely complex plot or necessarily having a huge setting or having tons and tons of characters. Narrative depth comes from the mixing and the layering of these three elements: setting upon character upon plot. Narrative depth comes from the points of contact between characters, the plot, and the setting. How do the characters, for example, reflect the setting? Are they cultural rebels standing against one or more aspects of the setting, such as a corrupt church or a political leadership? Or are they representatives of elements of the setting, such as slavery or racism or other aspects of the setting, right? Or both. They could be rebelling against one aspect of the setting and then but also supporting others, right? Maybe they want to change things. Maybe they want to preserve things. Maybe they want to do a little bit of both, right? In the case of plot, right? How do characters and plot interact? Well, many times characters have their own backstories. They're heroes of their own story, and therefore they bring up their own subplots, which are can be woven into the plot. The plot itself, like I said, serves as a way of giving a sense of direction and order to the gameplay. Going from point A to point B, from one action to the next, and also helps to frame the action. It gives you an idea of what you're doing and why you're doing, and the effects of those actions. Right? I would give you a little bit of advice to my listeners that a simpler plot is the best in this case. A simpler, strong plot that is flexible enough to carry the weight of the narrative and therefore the weight of the game. When you bring them all together, you bring in extra elements to the gameplay, to the game that would be absent without it. And that again is narrative depth. The sense that there's more to it, right? That there's always more, something around the corner. In the corner, there's always something more. And when you do that, you tend to minimize and not eliminate that all bugbear of ludonarrative dissonance. There shouldn't be any dissonance because the ludo aspect, the moving parts of the game, the gameplay, matches the narrative. Why? Because the narrative has been put into the service of the game, in the whole of the game, right? You created a game and said, okay, part of creating this game is I'm going to have this story, and this is how I'm going to use this story to make a better game. Something that if you come from the other side of the issue, saying I'm going to make this game in order to make a better story, a delivered story, my answer with that, well, if you want to tell me a story, make a movie, write a book, right? I want to play the game, and I want to play games They have awesome stories in them. But we have to remember the fact that story is just another element of game design. Well, I hope you were able to follow all that. And there will be more videos talking about this because I'm sure that a lot of people have a lot of questions and also a lot of counter arguments, which I will be discussing in the next video. But for now, I hope you comment and subscribe, and I will be trying to read as many of the comments as possible to follow the discussion. And as always, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you when I see you. Good night.